Welcome to Looking at Lucasfilm, the podcast with a different perspective on the world of Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and all of the other entities that George Lucas, Kathleen Kennedy, and the rest of the team at Lucasfilm have dreamed up over the past 40 years. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and my co-host, the one, the only Dan Z, and I are recording this on Wednesday, May 13th, which is when Dan revealed to me that he may be getting into raising chickens. Is that what you were telling me?
There's discussion around the Zehr household that we may get a couple of chickens for some eggs and just some family fun. So we'll see. My only request is that we name one of them Princess Leia, because I like the pun with that.
That's such a dad joke.
Yes.
Okay. Now, mind you, Dan, I've also been keeping tabs on you on Twitter lately, and I want to say over the last day or so, you effectively said you wanted to start walling yourself off from news in regards to the Mandalorian. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically, we've had an influx over the past few weeks of casting announcements via Variety and the Hollywood Reporter, and all reputable sites that obviously know what they're talking about. But the challenge for me is I would really like to experience The Mandalorian season 2 as a fan, and like when a character walks on the screen for the first time, I want that jaw drop moment. I mean, let's face it, the child debuting at the end of the first episode was what rattled popular culture. I mean, there was the reverberations of that were massive. And I think a big reason, besides the fact that the child is adorable, is because it was a surprise to see what looked like a baby Yoda. And if we'd known that in advance, I don't know that the series catches on the way that it does. So now we've got, the discussion of Fed and Ahsoka and Bo-Katan, which is really kind of the last straw for me. And I thought, boy, it really would have been great to watch these episodes and see these characters and have the reveal that way, as opposed to 6 months ahead via some casting report. I prefer the story. I prefer the narrative, not when I'm reading a book, I don't want to just rip out a couple of pages and somebody tell me what happens.
Well, Mike, you see, I think you and I come at this from a different point of view. I'm a process guy. In fact, my daughter to this day tells the story. We were at a remember when like Barnes and Nobles would do these book nights for the release of Harry Potter, and you had to be there at midnight and buy your copy. And
I worked at Barnes and Noble for the release of the 6th and 7th books.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So did we dress up as a particular character?
Oh, Harry, of course.
Oh, okay. Yes. All right. I'm a Dumbledore guy myself. But no, it was one of these things where, we're standing there in line and my daughter turns around and I've cracked the book to the back. And she's like, Dad. And it's like, no, I enjoy, I love what J.K. Rowling does. I love how she does structure. She's very much in the Chekhov school of you introduce something in Act 1 and you definitely pay it off in Act 2. So, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't spoiling the story to look to the end to see what happens. It was like, okay, now that I know where I'm going, how do I get there? And I to circle back to what you're saying, in fact, I forgot when I was putting together the notes tonight about the Katie Sackhoff news earlier today about Bo-Katan. Is it, what was the
Bo-Katan? Yep.
Bo-Katan. Yep. Yeah, you're right. I mean, but for me, when I look at the news, like, for example, and correct me if I'm getting the pronunciation of the name wrong here, Temuera Morrison, is that correct?
Temuera Morrison, yep.
Temuera Morrison, okay.
The voice of the father in Moana, also.
Oh, God. I thank you for doing the Disney tie. I did not know that. But again, to the news that we have is that he's supposedly being brought onto the Mandalorian to play Boba Fett. And let's face it, from as far back as episode 5 of the Mandalorian, the first season, when that mysterious set of spurs appeared, near the lifeless body, or the supposedly lifeless body of Fennec Shand.
Mhm.
The fans have been talking about this. I I don't know. I get what you're saying from a, you know, I Rosario Dawson potentially coming on board as Ahsoka Tano, that sort
Mhm.
of thing. Um,
That we
it,
basically, if we would have had Ahsoka,
mhm,
Boba Fett, and Bo-Katan revealed in the show as the show
mhm,
was airing every Friday,
yeah,
fandom would have exploded. I mean, it would have taken the child hype and duplicated or replicated that, and now we're not going to get that, and that's unfortunate. I mean, but also you got to keep in mind, not only is Coffee with Kenobi completely spoiler and speculation free,
mhm,
but when I have my expectations at a certain level because of things like this,
mhm.
it's very hard to meet them, and so that's just kind of my
Um,
own selfish point of view, and also keep in mind that when my wife goes Christmas shopping, I don't even wanna know what store she goes to.
Okay,
So
okay, I get that, but for me, it's just sort of like it's ingredients. It's like, oh, she's being added to the mix, and that character is being added to the mix. Or for that matter, just the news over the past 2 weeks about Robert Rodriguez, who Disney fans probably know best from the Spy Kids movie, or Peyton Reed, who did the first two Ant-Man movies and has been signed to do a third. I mean, I love the fact that they're joining an already really deep bench when it comes to directors for The Mandalorian.
yeah.
It just
Have you been watching that show too? Well, we're gonna
and
get to that later,
oh
but oof,
God, have I?
I know.
And I have to say at this point, I could sit and watch Dave Filoni read the phone book.
Oh my goodness.
You know,
A master
it,
class.
well, in fact, it's so interesting you say that because if you saw the most recent episode, or well, again, you have access to additional material, Dan. I'm talking about episode 2, and where he talked about the connections between, for example, Phantom Menace and Return of the Jedi,
Mhm.
and the whole notion of that maybe Obi-Wan really wasn't the father figure that Anakin needed. And I have to admit, I had my eyes opened about these two films, which, Dan, to be completely honest, I've previously thought of as, lesser installments of the Skywalker saga. But
Sure.
oh, I mean,
That
Dave gave me a new appreciation for these two films, or what the narrative was trying to do there.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't need to tell you how many times I've poured over this mythology, and now, like, I had never thought about
Hmm.
Anakin as basically being longing for a father figure. Well, I had, to the degree that I feel like Palpatine tried to kind of take that role to a certain
Hmm.
degree. But the fact that Obi-Wan was always the brother and not the father figure, I
Hmm.
thought was mind-blowing, and I had never looked at Qui-Gon's defeat as the loss of a father figure and a change in the direction of Anakin Skywalker. I always looked at the loss of Qui-Gon as the loss of more potential learning about the Force,
Hmm.
but never from that perspective. So my jaw actually dropped, and I thought, "This is brilliant." I mean, we know
No, no,
Dave, but it's
no.
brilliant.
No, absolutely. I get it. Just and don't get me wrong. I enjoy the Disney Gallery, the Mandalorian show, just for the way it pops the hood, and
Mm.
and to listen to the folks involved with the show talk about their choices, and the way they do things.
And the reverence they have for the story, particularly when Taika Waititi talks about it, was rather
Mhm.
moving for me because sometimes you just don't know if they're just saying, "Oh, I'll play in the Star Wars sandbox," but the fact that they all revere it I think is really quite endearing.
Well, and what a wonderful one-two punch to have him talk that way, and then to learn just in the past week or so that Taika's, working on a Star Wars feature,
Yeah,
and and to put the cherry on the sundae, he's working with the screenwriter of 1917. I mean, it's just sort of like, I
they're great.
you know. I again, forgive me for burbling here, but in a weird sort of way, it honestly feels like we're kind of in a golden age for Star Wars, which, given the way people were talking even just 6 months ago, when the Rise of Skywalker came out, and a number of folks were grumbling at the fact that we have so much strong stuff
Yeah.
Well written, well thought out stuff. But on the other hand, speaking of, that makes me think of young kids, the little league team and all that. But how great was it to hear Dave talk about, George reminding him, remember, to keep these things optimistic. Kids really need this today.
Mm.
And it was
I'm
just,
so glad he said that. I think that's so important. And one of the things I was worried about with The Mandalorian before I saw a single episode that we would lose that optimism and that hope. So, I mean, when the
mhm.
maker says that, you got to take that to heart.
Oh, no, absolutely, absolutely. Now, we were just talking about Dave's take on, Anakin, and the whole notion of losing the father figure with Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan not quite being there for him as the father figure. And I have to, forgive me for doing this pivot, but you've seen the rumor that's out there, right, about the Obi-Wan series, right?
I have
Um,
not. I have
okay.
not.
Um, Supposedly, and again, we're going to lean heavily into reporters, very good friends here, folks. Reportedly, allegedly, and supposedly, but there's a rumor making the rounds that as part of the rewrites for the Obi-Wan series, the 4 installments for Disney Plus, sometime debuting sometime next year. Supposedly, Disney has reached out to Hayden Christensen with the notion of, to feel him out about whether or not he'd be willing to come back to play Anakin. And, and with the notion of, look, it would allow you, once again to reunite with Ewan McGregor, and his version of Obi-Wan. And I would have initially dismissed this as wishful thinking on fans' part until the Tamora Morrison casting news came through, and and especially in the heels of Dave talking the way he did about Phantom Menace. Face it, right now the folks at Lucasfilm, the bunch that are calling the shots creatively right now, they're really as comfortable when it comes to the prequels, and more to the point, the projects that are associated with the prequels, like Star Wars Clone Wars animated series, as the folks who got the last trilogy off the ground were about bringing in performers from the original trilogy. And
Hmm.
uh, especially on the heels of what they did with Vader, and forgive me if I'm spoiling this for anybody, but the very last episode of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Victory and Death, I think it was called.
Yes.
Okay. And the surprise cameo at the end where they're at the crash site, Darth Vader makes an appearance. And uh, let's face it, Dan, the Darth Vader we're seeing at that moment is not the as played by David Prowse, older
Right.
Vader. This is fresh in the can, Anakin, you
Hmm.
know, uh, you know, and I, for one, I would be intrigued to see Hayden get another swing at Vader.
This,
Um,
I just, as fun as that sounds during
mhm,
this part of the timeline, Vader's Vader, and Obi-Wan and Anakin don't meet each other for 19 years until A New Hope.
mhm,
So I feel like they would really be subverting them. It takes away the power of when he says, I've been waiting for you, Obi-Wan, we meet at last. When they
mhm,
finally reunite, and that Death Star, that makes that so much more powerful and poignant. So unless they did flashbacks,
mhm,
or they just showed Vader in the distance, just sort of, you know, preening out into the darkness, imagining killing Obi-Wan. I can't
mhm.
imagine that. I just can't understand why they would do that.
Okay. No, I get that. And you bring up a valid point. But again, I hate to say this, but given what the crew that's handling the Mandalorian has done to date, and more to the point, when you put that alongside of how ridiculously strong season 7
Mm,
of Star Wars: The Clone Wars was.
right.
I mean, at this point, it's just sort of like, with these guys, and and what about these very talented women who are also, part of the group.
Sure.
I, it's like, absolutely take the toolbox, see what you can do. Speaking
The
of which,
last, yeah, the Clone Wars. I mean, real quick, the last two episodes of the Clone Wars were just completely stunning and
Mhm,
intense, and just speaking of master classes, a master class on how to use music and silence to
mhm,
build suspense and terror, and
mhm,
just so full of symbolism. The Vader stuff at the end was such a wonderful surprise.
mhm,
Snow troopers, probe droids,
mhm.
the the Imperial shuttle, just absolutely wonderful. And I'm all for more Vader, but to me, Vader should be like Bruce the shark in Jaws. The less you have of him, the more powerful he is.
And it's so interesting you say that, because I was doing some research about Empire, out ahead of the feature for today's show, and I was really surprised to learn that, what is it? You're 20 minutes into Empire before you get to see Vader.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
That's right.
Um, well, anyway, before we get to that stuff, folk, I just wanted to circle back on Victory and Death again, because I loved the writing of these last shows. For example, I loved the notion that, oh, Ahsoka and Rex, especially after Rex had his chip removed, and um, the whole notion of, they made the deliberative choice of set their weapons at the sun. They didn't want to hurt the clones.
Mhm.
And in fact, in that scene on the hangar deck, when it's so desperate, when the ship is being, pulled into the gravitational, field of the moon, and yet they're facing down this squad of clones, and it's like they have to escape, but they're still not willing to kill their compatriots. Um,
It's great. It's actual Jedi pacifism, which is what, Luke learns at the end of Return of the Jedi.
mhm,
That very few Jedi actually do in the mythology, but the myth of redemptive violence we have in society, and the fact that Ahsoka subverts that,
mhm.
it shows how incredibly well-rounded and important she is, and impactful she is, not only in this story, but just in fiction. I think it's pretty refreshing to have a character like this in this continually morally ambiguous culture we live in.
Absolutely. And then, and the grace note at the end, where, we're now on the crash site, and here are Rex and Ahsoka, and you see that they have, they've obviously put this huge effort into burying the dead, the
Yeah,
notion of honoring, the clones that they work side by side with, and it just,
very
again, it
powerful.
just, very powerful, great writing,
All written by Filoni.
uh, well, again, that this is why, I would really love to see him play in that Obi-Wan sandbox. And
Yeah.
um
Or to get his
bef-
own feature film.
oh no, that would be cool. Before we get, speaking of feature, before we get to the feature here, I wanted to ask, did you see Mark Hamill's interview with Entertainment Weekly this week?
I sort of saw some clips about it, but I didn't really read the whole thing because I feel like, well, I don't know. You tell me what he said, and then we'll chat.
Well, just again, you were talking about the age we live in, and it just, it's so partisan, it's so fractious, and the weird thing is that here's Mark Hamill being incredibly gracious, that he got asked, it's like, again, so, okay, we've just seen, the rise of Skywalker, and, your character came back, and do you ever envision playing Luke Skywalker again? And he's like, oh, I can't imagine it. No, I had a beginning, a middle, and an end. These films gave me far more than I ever expected when we started out. So it never even occurred to me, My farewell was in episode 9. It was, bittersweet. And I love all those people. And I certainly have affection for George and the character he created. I'm full of gratitude as for what was given to me in my career. But I don't want to be greedy. There are so many more stories to tell and so many great actors to tell them. They don't need me. And it's like, how refreshing is that to hear?
It's great, and he's right. I mean, doesn't just like having having Hayden Christensen come back. It doesn't make sense because both of these characters had a beginning, middle, and end, and it's very satisfying. Sometimes it's okay to stop going back to the buffet. Sometimes it's okay to move on to something else.
Well, and speaking of moving on, Mark got asked about The Mandalorian, and he felt that, they have a wonderful advantage with The Mandalorian because in that it's economical storytelling. They don't have the burden of delivering a gigantic special effects extravaganza that the films have to do. He talked about it sort of gets back to the basics of George envisioning this as a Western in space. It has the tone of a Sergio Leone Western, and I'm very impressed with it. And for me, it's a very smart move on their part because you can't keep trying to top. It's like the superhero movies. They have to deliver these gargantuan epics. And with The Mandalorian, they can just concentrate more on the characters and the storytelling. I think it's excellent. So,
he's totally right. And he's, again, I think this is just people grasping on, oh, Luke must be upset. Someone texted me actually today and said, I heard Mark Hamill is upset with Lucasfilm. And I said, well, because of that article today? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, did you read it? Because all he was saying is it was great. My time is over. And that doesn't seem like story-wise would be a place for me. But I'm happy with how everything went. So, and you take that and you enjoy it and you move on, I guess. It's because we love Mark Hamill and he's so witty. I still think he should have his own talk show on Disney Plus because that would be must-watch viewing. Like, remember that one you and I, when he and Frank Oz talked? Remember when we covered that about a year ago?
Oh, yeah. No, he did such a wonderful job of leading Frank to stories and at the same time contributing. And he was genuinely funny, but at the same time, did such a beautiful job of shining the spotlight on Frank. That's the 92 Street Y series, folks. Definitely worth seeking out if you haven't seen it. And speaking of Frank Oz, who made his debut in the Star Wars Episode 5, right? Empire Strikes Back. Okay, when we get back from this commercial break, Dan and I are gonna do a little deep dive into Star Wars 2.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Healthcare professionals can lead their careers with LinkedIn. Discover jobs by specialty, preferred shifts, and even desired salary. From mental health therapists to radiology technicians, it's now faster and easier for healthcare professionals to find the right fit. Learn more at linkedin.com/healthcare. Side effects may include faster job placement, improved work-life balance, and increased career satisfaction.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana lets you buy your next car on your terms. Explore a massive inventory online, filter for what matters, and find your perfect match. Then choose delivery to your home or pick it up at one of Carvana's iconic car vending machines. Every car also comes with a 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can make sure it's the right fit. Buy your car on Carvana. Delivery or pickup fees may apply. Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Carvana.
And we're back. Before we get started here, by the way, folks, if you haven't been going over to StarWars.com lately, first of all, you've been missing out on some wonderful essays that Dan has been writing over there. In fact, you've done 7 pieces for them since February. Is that correct?
Yeah, that sounds right. I think I'm getting close to almost 80 total since I started about 5 years ago. But yeah, I've been doing a weekly Teaching with Star Wars column that they asked me to do, and it's been fun. I've got some pieces coming out honoring The Empire Strikes Back as well.
Well, in fact, as I was waiting for Dan to hop on Uber conference tonight, was over there reading your Empire at 40 piece, The Wisdom of Do or Do Not. Really a great article, kind of well worth seeking out, folks. But
thank you.
I have to ask Dan. Now I know you saw the original Star Wars in '77. Your family took you a drive-in. Is that correct? Or
that's right. Yeah, it was actually summer of 1978.
Okay.
Yes.
What about Empire? How and when did you see Empire?
I saw Empire in 1980 when it came
Mhm,
out, but it wasn't the first day. I think it had been out for about a week or two. And
mhm.
let's see, I was probably about 7 years old, 7, 8 years old. And I remember my mom coming out. I was outside actually reading the novel because I was apparently wasn't myself yet. I was reading the book before I saw the movie. How ironic.
Ah,
And actually my brother still yells at me because I told him that Yoda died when I read the Jedi novel before we saw the movie. So
ah,
he throws that out once in a while. But yeah, anyway, so my mom came out and said, "Hey, you know that book you're reading? You want to go see the movie?" And I thought, "Oh, wow." Because I think in my brain, I thought it takes a year to see these movies because they're so hard because they sell out. So
mhm,
we went and saw it, and I probably saw it, gosh, with all the re-releases,
mhm.
I'm sure I saw it about 25 times in the theater.
Wow.
It's still my favorite Star Wars movie, for sure.
Well, that's understandable. Though the interesting thing is that if you well, we were also talking about J.W. Rizzler. Is that correct?
Rinsler, yeah.
Rinsler. Yes, he wrote the back in 2010 the wonderful Making of Empire Strikes Back book.
Mhm.
And what's interesting about that book is that he talks about how George initially, right after Empire was released, this was not necessarily George's favorite film. But I think that largely had to do with how snake bit, this particular production was. There was, God, there was so much stuff that went wrong during the production of Empire that was completely out of George's control. There was the blizzard in Finland.
Yeah,
Um,
the Blizzard, there's a lot of great stuff about that. That thing was so bad. I mean,
mhm,
the opening, that's the first stuff they shot was the stuff on location there. And
mhm,
the weather was so bad that when Hamill was laying on the ground
mhm,
for the sequences where he's sees the vision of Sir Alec Guinness,
mhm,
he would shake and be very, very cold. And within a minute, he was
mhm.
shaking involuntarily because he was so cold. And everyone, when they left Norway, had the mark of frostbite underneath all of their
Oh,
eyes because they were so cold.
jeez. Wow. I, and but that was literally just the start
Yeah.
of the challenges. I mean, for example, they then go to L Street Studios in the UK, and again, it was a huge production. They used all 8 sound stage, or they were supposed to use all 8 sound stages
Mhm.
at L Street, but just before they got there, Stanley Kubrick was shooting The Shining there.
That's right.
And and I want to say in January of '79 there was a fire, and it took out one particularly large set on The Shining, and so it was like they had to shut down production to repair the soundstage, rebuild the sets, and here comes Empire over the hill, and they had they had laid claim to all 8 of the sound stages, because I want to say there's 64 individual sets that had to be built for the Zehr Kirshner film. And and it was one of these things where it's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Kubrick isn't finished with The Shining. You can't have the soundstage. But to give L Street credit, they built a 9th soundstage while Empire was in production to try to accommodate the folks from Lucasfilm. And it's one of those things, you look at it today, and in fact, I came across a wonderful story about the special edition
Mhm.
that Kirshner supposedly reached out to George when he found out that they were, going to do this special edition, and he basically begged and pleaded that for a lot of the scenes on Cloud City, and again, the irony, Cloud City, you're up in the sky, but they're all indoors. And he's like, please, we weren't able to do this, back in '79 when we were shooting. Can you please go and make some of the interiors exteriors so we can actually see that we're up in the clouds? Let's talk about Empire Strikes Back. Is there, do you have a particular favorite scene out of the film or sequence, Dan?
There's I mean everything in Hoth is pretty wonderful. My
Hmm.
favorite sequence is the carbon freeze chamber. Of course, the power of Han going into carbonite. I think there's a ton of symbolism there, but for my money, it's the sequence when Luke and Vader fight, and Vader says, "The Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you are not a Jedi yet." And Luke walks up those blue and orange, or that dark and orange steps, and they stand in front of each other as silhouettes, and there's no music of any kind, which is interesting for a John Williams film. And then Luke ignites his lightsaber first, showing aggression. I just think it's gorgeously filmed. Plus, it's the most with Han Solo. It's got the most of the Falcon, and it's got the bravest ending to me in cinema for a really long time. I mean, think about how people felt when Infinity War was over and that sucker punch of Thanos wins. I mean, that's what it was like for us in 1980 with Vader, and we had to wait 3 actual years to find out what was going to happen.
That's an excellent point. Again, in the research for tonight, came across, this kind of, there's the famous story of, that David Prowse, when he was on set, it had entirely different dialogue he was saying, because they were trying to protect the secret of this film. And it's been since 1980, folks. I think we can say this, I am your father. But the interesting thing, again, it was Mark Hamill who put a little more reality back into the situation. Well, look, remember the film. I'm standing there out on that outcropping, and it's supposedly this is the air circulation system for the entire Cloud City, and so there are these giant industrial fans on me. Blowing me to simulate that I'm and the air system of the space station. So we were going to have to re-record that dialogue anyway in post because you couldn't hear us over the fans. But Hamill then went on to say that I guess they were getting ready to shoot it, and Irv kind of waves them over and explains that, okay, this is what Darth Vader is actually saying to you, and you have to react to that. And let me tell you that you are now the third person on the planet who knows this. I know it, and George knows it. And if this leaks out, that means you talked.
Wow.
So they film his reaction to the line, not what David Prowse is saying. Again, it's a wonderful moment, a wonderful piece of acting. But at the same time, when you saw it in an audience for the first time, it kind of took the top of your head off because it really changed everything you knew about Star Wars right up until that point.
That's right. I like looking at the history of the script because the making of The Empire Strikes Back by J.W. Rensselaer that you mentioned, it's just an absolutely glorious book. If you can find it, certainly check it out. It's just full of pictures and behind the scenes stuff and the actual images of the script with George's handwriting on it, scratching things out, and he and Kaz narrowing down some of Yoda's famous euphemisms and things like that, and the evolution of what's going on with Vader and in George's constant challenge that it was the middle film, so he wanted it to be darker. And he wanted to be able to stand on its own, but still leave some sort of a cliffhanger ending too. And he just wasn't sure how to handle that because he already blown up the Death Star in the first movie. And he always says that he wanted to save that for the third movie, which of course he did later. But it's fun, the challenges that they went narratively speaking of trying to find sort of the secret sauce for this thing.
Oh, absolutely. But the weird part of it is even the stuff they discarded, for example, I want to say in the making of Empire Strikes Back, they actually have images of Darth Vader's castle on the volcanic planet, which we don't get to see till Rogue One, years later. To get back to the whole snake pit thing, I mean, face it, one of the reasons that, it's Kasdan and Lucas working on the screenplay for this is that Lee Brackett, who, George had hired in December of 1977 to work off of that original 9-page outline, which by the way, to be fair here, I think we should credit that George Kurtz, the producer.
Gary Kurtz,
excuse me. He was the one who actually came up supposedly with the name of The Empire Strikes Back. Wonderful title, really kept the flavor of the old serials.
Nice pulpy, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so Leah does the first pass on the screenplay. She hands it in February, and in fact, I want to say that in the Rizzler book, there are those wonderful reproduction of pages where George has scratched out things like, "No, we need to change this." But unfortunately, when he finally reached out to Lee, she was already in the hospital, and she died of cancer in March of that year. And so
that's right. And they used basically nothing that she had written was in it. But to George's credit, and they actually go over this in the book, the Writers Guild probably wouldn't have done this, but George insisted that she get writing credit. And she still does to this day. She has a writing credit for The Empire Strikes Back just because he respected her and he said she was a nice person. I mean, that's the kind of guy George Lucas is.
No, that's it exactly. Though, the sad bookend to that story is, his battle with the Producers Association about opening with The Crawl, and which I guess was okay when he was directing the film, but not when Irv Kershner was directing the film. And that's what made George actually withdraw from the Producers Guild, didn't it? Or
I'm a little vague on this. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say about this.
There's so many instances when it comes to Empire where they got tripped up left and right. I mean, the story of poor John Barry, the production designer, who because they had fallen so far behind schedule, what with the issues with The Shining occupying one of their sound stages and that sort of thing, they gave John a field promotion. He then became in charge of shooting the second unit on the movie, and he'd been 2 weeks on the job when one day on the set he just collapsed, and they found out he had a temperature of 104. They called for an ambulance. They took him off the set, and it turns out the poor guy had come down with meningitis and died just days later. And this sort of thing just kept happening over and over on Empire, which is why it went from its original budget of $18 million, which was $7 more than the original Star Wars had been shot for. It finally topped out at $35 million. And you have to understand that this is also at the same time that George is trying to get Skywalker Ranch built.
That's right.
It was a really, really tough time. The one saving
by his own admission too, one of the main reasons he made Empire was to have money to build Skywalker Ranch.
Yeah. And in fact, it got so tight toward the end that, remember, one of the things that George announced going into Star Wars 2 that he was going to fund it entirely himself, and that Fox was only going to distribute the film, and as a result most of the profits were supposed to go back to George. But things got so tight and so desperate because he was being pulled in two directions with the film and the work on Skywalker Ranch that he actually had to go to Fox and ask them for a loan. And Alan Ladd, to his credit, Alan Ladd Jr., said, "Sure, no, we were all looking forward to this film and happy to give you the money to get this thing done." But the other executives at Fox were furious that Ladd Jr. hadn't played this to the company's advantage, that he hadn't set up onerous terms or that sort of thing. In fact, that's what forced Ladd to leave Fox the following year. That they felt that the studio's profits could have been so much bigger if he basically put the screws to George at that particular moment during Empire. But anyway, long story short, in a weird sort of way, the very fact that the film ran so far over schedule turned out to be a positive thing, because Sir Alec Guinness, who played Obi-Wan in A New Hope, it was really touch and go as to whether he was going to be able to make it to appear in the film. Largely because Sir Alec had a history of issues with glaucoma. In fact, he, for the next 20 years of his life, he'd have a number of procedures to deal with cataracts and eye problems and that sort of thing. right in the middle of production of Empire. He had an eye operation. And, and then it was a question of, wow, will he have recuperated enough in time to actually come and shoot his scene for Obi-Wan? And as it turns out, because they were so far behind schedule, yes, he could. I want to say he was on, what was it? It was March of 79, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was able to come in at 8:30 in the morning. Excuse me, it was September 5th, 1979. Came in at 8:30 in the morning, and by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he had shot all of his scenes, and he was headed back home. And we get that lovely little scene with the Force Ghost.
Yeah.
But and which he was well compensated for, but we will not get into that part of it. But yeah, and the only other thing I think worth noting about Empire is to get back to Han being encased in the refresh my
carbonite.
memory again. What is the material?
Carbonite.
Carbonite. There we go. Part of that issue was that Harrison Ford, unlike Mark Hamill and Carrie, the contract he had signed for the original Star Wars film was only for that film. Whereas Carrie and Mark had language in their contracts that mentioned sequels, that they were under an obligation to come back if there were sequels made. And so I want to say in the initial 9-page outline, they actually explained that Han Solo is off. I want to say he's out trying to recruit other planets to join the rebellion. They did, George, because they wasn't sure Harrison would come back. It created an out for the character, a logical reason that he'd be off stage.
Isn't that funny? Because he's the least warm and fuzzy of all of them. He'd be terrible as an ambassador.
Very true. But at the same time, that was when he agreed to do it. It's like, I'll come back for this one. And it's like, all right, so let's put him in carbonite, because at least then, if he doesn't come back for the third, part of the trilogy, at least we have a way to explain where he is. And so just the fact that even as he's finishing 2, he's stressing about, he's not coming back for 3.
Well, we gotta close with the story about Harrison Ford finding out about who Luke's father is.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I almost blanked this one. So again, to double back to what I was saying earlier about Irv telling, Mark that, look, you are now the third person on the planet, and, who knows this. And if it leaks, we know it came from you. So Mark did, they honored the request, didn't tell anybody. And so it's the actual premiere of Empire Strikes Back, and Harrison Ford is in the theater seated in front of Mark Hamill, and the big moment comes in the movie, and here is David Prowse acting, but James Earl Jones saying, I am your father. And Harrison evidently, as Mark loves to tell the story, wheeled around in his seat and in the middle of a crowded theater. It's like, I'm trying to think of the nice PG-13 way of saying this.
Maybe fire truck?
Yeah, there we go. You fire truck. Why didn't you tell me? So,
I didn't know that story until I saw the notes for tonight. What a great, so that is such vintage Harrison Ford.
Yeah. But anyway, all of this research over the last day or so, I definitely have to circle back on this movie. And obviously, you've written that wonderful teaching essay for StarWars.com. But what are you doing for Empire's 40th over at Coffee with Kenobi?
Yeah, well, again, feel free to look every Wednesday for the Teaching with Star Wars column on StarWars.com. We've got 4 out so far. On Coffee with Kenobi, we've got Steve Sansweet coming on the show to talk about The Empire Strikes Back, collectibles, the history of that movie. Obviously, he's one of the leading, Star Wars experts on the planet, and he's just a great guy anyway. I've got some feelers out for some other interviews, so hopefully those pan out. But either way, it's going to be great fun. We just did a feature-length recording of Star Wars A New Hope, a commentary that's going to be released. We're going to record one for Empire really, really soon. We just wrapped up Clone Wars, and then on our Patreon page this weekend, we actually have an hour-and-a-half show where we review or we rank all 11 Star Wars films from our least to our most favorite, and it ended up being quite a conversation, particularly because I had always vowed I would never do that because it was too hard, but we made it happen, and it was a great fun, and people will love to listen to on our Patreon page.
Oh, I have to check that out. And anything special for pour over, or
that is going to be the pour over, the ranking of the films, yes, on Patreon for sure.
All right. On our side of the fence, let's see. We got a new Disney dish coming up with Lentesta. Likewise, I'm going to be recording a new Marvel Us Disney with Aaron Adams sometime in the coming week. Drew Taylor and I just did brand new Fine Tuning, where we got to interview the director of Scoob, and he had some wonderful stories to share about that Hanna-Barbera inspired film. Universal Joint, which I do in Dutch with Dustin Fuse, we're going to be talking about. They just later this week, they're going to start partially reopening City Walk at Universal Orlando, and that's going to be interesting to watch what happens there. And likewise, as they partially open Disney Springs, I want to say it's the third-party participants that will be opening there. Myself and Shelley Valladolid will be talking about that from the merch side of things on I Want That. But until those shows pop up, if you could do Dan and I a favor, folks, if you could head over to iTunes to rate and recommend Coffee with Kenobi, as well as looking at Lucasfilm, that would be incredibly helpful. And if you really enjoyed what you heard tonight, if you could head over to Bandcamp and subscribe, that allows us to do things like, I want to say with the Rinsler book, there was a new edition done. There was the original that was published in 2010, but in 2013, there was an enhanced edition that was done as an ebook.
Oh, digital. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, has even more artwork and even more material. So folks, if you can't chase down the original, do seek that out. Now, for the social media side of things, Dan, where can they find you?
Sure. Well, Coffee with Kenobi is all over social media. In fact, we're trying to make a big push to get our Instagram up, so be sure to go to Coffee with Kenobi on Instagram for that. Twitter, Facebook. You can join our Facebook group, CWK Cafe, for lots of fun Star Wars conversation, family friendly, positive, all that good stuff. And then for me personally, on Twitter at Mr. Zehr, MRZEHR.
Okay. And Nancy wants me to remind you folks that for Jim Hill Media, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram, but over on Facebook, we are Jim Hill Media News. And again, speaking of news, folks, from here going forward to October, which, by the way, our last bit of news, Bob Chapek just last week confirmed that they had actually finished shooting season 2 of The Mandalorian, just as all the COVID-19 disruption of production. So they're in post right now, and they are in fact going to make their promised release date in October of this year. Meanwhile, we'll have another 6 episodes of Disney Gallery The Mandalorian to look forward to sort of tide us over till then. But again, out of respect to Mr. Zehr here, we're going to try to figure out how to talk about season 2 of Mandalorian without giving too much away. So ixnay on telling Dan about additional casting, okay?